What's up, everybody? Welcome to Mick Thinks Tiny. My name is Mick. So, as the tiny house industry has continued to change, there's been one topic that's been top of mind for everyone that's interested in going tiny and people who are just curious about the tiny house industry in general, and that's price. So, today we are going to try to answer the one question that's been on a lot of your minds, and I've seen a lot of comments around, and that's whether or not tiny houses are too expensive. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and make sure you watch to the end because I'm going to talk about what, if anything, you can do to make sure you don't overpay for your tiny home. Let's jump into it. Let's talk about whether or not tiny homes are too expensive. All right, welcome back. So today we're talking about whether or not tiny homes are too expensive. This is a crucial topic for this industry, especially right now in 2025. It's still pretty early at the time that this video is being recorded. We're not even in spring yet. And so there's a lot of people who are curious about going tiny, people who are currently looking for tiny homes, and there's a lot of questions around whether or not it's worth it. So if you remember, I did a video last year where I talked about whether or not tiny homes are worth it. And there's an important piece of context I mentioned in that video that I'm going to bring into this video today as well too. If you haven't seen that video, make sure you check it out. For those of you who have seen that video, this image that you're going to look at now is familiar, but there's some key aspects of the tiny house industry that create a sense of pressure because there's other elements in our society that sort of make the tiny house industry in what I'm sort of seeing as like a pressure cooker, and that's the manufactured homes industry. So manufactured homes are becoming more popular. They're becoming more expensive. Believe it or not, you can get a brand new manufactured home for $400,000 in some places, especially here in California, and that's as much as the median home price for a standard family home. So the manufactured home industry definitely puts pressure on this industry. RVs and van life put pressure on this industry. The real estate market as a whole puts pressure on this industry. Tourism in particular, and then social media and HGTV, which I'll go into a little bit more, have created a situation where this industry is really attractive, but there's some downsides to that. So this is kind of the context that we're looking at right now. This is kind of the world that we're living in, and these are some of the things that are creating situations where we might see higher prices than we're seeing right now in the tiny house industry. So when we're looking at the current market in the United States, there's a couple of things that are really important to pay attention to. First and foremost is the traditional real estate market. So as we sit right now in early 2025, the median home price in the United States still hovers around $400,000. That's not the primary issue. The primary issue is what it looks like for people who are trying to afford that $400,000 house, right? So the average tiny home is still hovering around $67,000, but median household income is a little bit under 80. And if you take it a step further and you look at per capita income, which is the income that one person has in the United States, that's under 50K. So the median, like the person that's sitting at this median per capita income of $43,000, and even a household that's making about 80K a year still can't afford the $400,000 home. So that creates a situation where anything under that amount becomes attractive, at least from a marketing standpoint, and being able to say like, okay, well, it's not that expensive because it's still under $400,000. So that's kind of what we have to think about when we're considering the tiny house industry. The one way that I wanted to sort of break this down and essentially have this conversation and answer this question is by looking at the price range for tiny homes in this industry. So what I've done is I've done some research on tiny homes in the current market and the price, and I'm just gonna go through the full range of prices you could spend from the very cheapest tiny home to the most expensive luxury tiny home in the current market right now. So no surprise, the lowest level in this market is Amazon. Amazon has created a situation where you could go and buy a tiny house for under 20K and have it shipped to you. We've seen the YouTube unboxing videos where someone buys a tiny house on Amazon and it comes and it's all ready to go for the most part. So we're gonna bring Amazon in here as the lowest threshold for the price range for tiny homes. So if you were to search tiny homes on Amazon right now, you get a page that looks something like this. You've got a range of homes from 10K to 30K. They all look a little bit different. So we're gonna focus on the one that's $9,000. So we're going to say that that tiny home is actually what we would consider the base for our threshold. So if you want to go on the absolute cheap, you can get a tiny house today for $9,000 plus about $1,000 in shipping. So 10K, it would look like this. It'd be a 20 by 40 foot prefab tiny home. It would have 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen. So this is what you would be getting. It's about 11,000 pounds for those of you that care about weight sort of things. So that's sort of like the low range for tiny homes. Next up is sort of like as we inch closer to that middle of 67,000 is Dragon Tiny Homes. They just released their new Genesis model. It's 135 square feet. It's got a loft and a queen bed, and it's coming in at $39,500. Now, I know you're probably thinking, I would never live in 135 square feet, but we have to look at where this industry started and where this movement started. This was sort of the goal, to downsize, to be focusing on minimalism, lowering your carbon footprint. So 135 square feet wasn't considered out of the norm or too small, if you will. Next up is sort of like middle of the road. We're looking at Phoenix Park models. I've had them on the channel. You can check out that video as well too. They have a home that's called their Classic Deluxe model. It's an 11 by 34 foot home. That's not including that front porch. And it's around $61,000. So this is what we're looking at, what you're going to be able to get for your money in that $60,000 price range. Now, this is a park model, which is a little bit different from a traditional tiny home. But this market, this part of the industry is exploding. It's booming in the tiny house communities, particularly in the South, like Texas, Georgia, even in parts of North Carolina. So park models are here to stay, and they're an important part of the industry, especially because some of them are actually more affordable if you were to look at them side by side compared to a 34 by 12 foot traditional tiny home. Okay, now we're going to get a little bit more expensive here. Next up is Tiny Mountain Houses. I also had them on the channel early last year. You can check out their video. They've got a more traditional 26 by 8.5 foot tiny home coming in at $95,000. It's their Mount Bachelor. Sleeps about 2 to 8 people, and you're almost at 400 square feet, so plenty of space in that regard. But this is getting closer to that 100K range, which is kind of the threshold where a lot of you are starting to get kind of frustrated and saying, like, how much is too much? Next up is Lifescape Builders. I've mentioned them briefly. They are kind of the standout at TinyFest every year in San Diego. This is their 34 by 10 foot Dream Tree model. It's 507 square feet. It's got a large kitchen. It's a beautiful home inside and out, but it's going to cost you $143,000. So this is where we're kind of getting a little higher, and it's also custom, you know, in terms of the design and some of the features. So this is where we're getting a little bit higher up in that price point, where some of you all are getting kind of frustrated. And last but not least, coming in at the top is New Frontier Tiny Homes Etcher model, which I've talked about before. It's 300 square feet, chef's kitchen, king size bedroom, all the bells and whistles, $235,000. Now, technically, the golden tiny homes that are developed by Oud are $250,000, so they would be at the top of that price point. But those are more like novelty kind of one-offs. So I didn't include those because they're not a representation of the traditional market. So this is what you're looking at. You're looking at $10K to $235,000 for your price range. Okay, so when we're talking about the price, now that we have our range, we really need to think about, okay, well, what does the price equal? What does it get you? What are you getting at 10K? What are you getting at 235,000 that maybe you're not getting at the $94,000 price range? So I've made a list of things that, just in my opinion, I feel like are what price gets you potentially. Of course, as always, drop comments. I love to hear from you guys, especially if you've just closed on your tiny home or you're still in that shopping stage. But in my mind, price relates to size. If you go to any traditional tiny house builder's website, you're going to see an uptick in price relative to the size of the tiny home. There's no way you're going to pay the same amount for their 30 by 10 as you are going to pay for their 36 by 10. And it could be significantly more than like a 10K more per, couple of feet. So make sure you check that out and always ask questions about price changes. Amenities is a big one. As this industry continues to grow, there's more and more amenities that people are interested in and that builders are coming up with. So the front porch might cost you, the fireplace might cost you, the deck is probably going to cost you a significant amount. Rooftop decks are going to probably cost you. The design and the layout, because not every builder sort of focuses on custom builds. If you come to them and you say, I want a specific layout than their traditional models, that might cost you more money. And ultimately, the quality of the materials might cost you more money too. Now, that's not to say that there aren't $100,000 tiny homes out there that are made with really cheap materials that are going to fall apart in a year or two, because that is 100% the case. But on average, you're going to see potentially higher quality materials relative to your price. So this brings me to a tough question. It's a hard question to ask you all, but I think it's important. And that's, what are you willing to sacrifice for the right price? So if you're watching this video right now and price is your deal breaker, you're not willing to go over 70K, you are going to have to give something up, most likely, unless you go the DIY route and build it yourself. For those of you who are sitting at like 150K for your budget, you are probably going to get everything that you want and need. So it just depends on what you're willing to pay. And if you're not willing to pay a certain amount, what are you willing to sacrifice? So when we're thinking about sacrifices, this is in no means a complete list, but I just wanted to list out a couple that come to my mind. I think first and foremost is the builder. So you have to think about the type of home that builders build. Some of them don't build custom homes. You have to think about the cost and delivery. I cannot stress this enough. If you can find a builder in your state, you're going to save thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars on shipping cost. So that's important. You have to decide whether or not you're willing to give things up in terms of whether it's custom or you pick a model they have, the design and the layout, their amenities, the quality of the materials, and then last but not least, whether or not this is an investment or it's permanent. For those of you who are watching that are interested in buying tiny homes and going the Airbnb route, maybe you're willing to sacrifice on quality materials. Maybe your first tiny house sitting at like $50,000 with materials that are going to appeal to as many people as possible. Maybe that's worth it and you don't have to put as much money into it. Every tiny home Airbnb doesn't have to have quartz countertops to turn a profit. So that's a different way to look at this in terms of price compared to those of you who are watching and you're thinking, this is going to be my forever home. Maybe you're not willing to sacrifice as much, and that is perfectly okay. So why is this happening? This is probably the number one question in my mind. This is something I hear from a lot of you when you're frustrated in the comments, and rightfully so. There's a couple of things happening here, right? So in my mind, when we think back to these different aspects of these industries that are adjacent to the tiny house industry that are putting pressure on it, I would say the primary reason why we're seeing prices go up the way that they are is because of the traditional real estate market. Housing prices going up increases that threshold that is now considered affordable. Tourism increasing as well too, with people wanting to travel and share new experiences, and then ultimately social media. I did not include HGTV in this because there hasn't been any new HGTV shows that have come out in recent years, but social media is definitely having an impact on this industry. So when we're talking about social media, there's just some images of like what it kind of looks like when you're seeing like really cool photos, people sitting out in their tiny home looking out to like a beautiful field, or it's winter time and they're super cozy, different things in terms of layouts and design. So what I'm considering and what I'm sort of calling as the Instagram effect, in my opinion, is having a huge impact on this industry because we're in an experience age now. It's not enough to do things, you have to do them to a certain standard and then post about them, right? So influencers, content creators like myself, content creators like Levi Kelly, who've really put this industry on the map with like their really beautiful tours, like high-end, high-quality production tours of homes. The luxury side of this market, which does involve HGTV, literally Tiny Luxury came out about less than 10 years ago, and that sort of shifted people's views of tiny homes. Comparison culture is huge. I can't stress that enough. If a builder wants to become a tiny house builder today, they have to look at what other builders are producing, right? From a marketing standpoint, you can't come out as a brand new tiny house builder and not be able to compete with what people are posting on Instagram in their posts, in their reels, or on their YouTube channels. Resale is another one too. If you can make it more higher end and it lasts longer, then you're not going to lose as much money on resale when you try to sell it later, and ultimately just competition. So these are some of the things that are definitely putting pressure on builders, on tiny house community developers, on those of you who are buyers. The other question is, and this is kind of like a plea, right? When you're looking at an industry going up in price the way that this industry is, you're kind of wondering to yourself, is there a max? Is there a point where builders say, you know what, let's drop our prices down by like 10%? Or where the whole industry just agrees, like, let's put a cap on how much these houses are going to cost? And I'm here to tell you that unfortunately, that is not the case, right? So one of my favorite quotes and sort of like phrases is the price will rise to what the market will bear. In this society that we're in, we're in a capitalist society. It's only about profit. At the end of the day, that is something that keeps the lights on for these companies. And so even with the best of intentions, they have to be competitive in the market. And so if someone is out there, if there are enough people out there willing to pay for $300,000 tiny house, it will shift that threshold. And then the cheapest tiny house you can get, one day could be like $80K or $100K. So this is something to keep in mind, not to be like a downer, but just for the reality of it. So like as you're sitting here watching this video as a consumer, you're sitting in a market that it doesn't have a ceiling when it comes to the price for anything, let alone a tiny home. So what does this mean for you? It means you have 3 questions you have to ask yourself. You have to ask yourself, should I go tiny? And if you want more information on whether or not I feel like tiny homes are worth it, you can check out my other video that I did last year on that. You have to think about buying land versus renting. That is huge. That's the one thing that keeps people from moving, is deciding whether or not you want to buy the land yourself or you want to live in a community. You have to ask yourself how I should go tiny. Do I build it myself, learn a new skill, or do I want to take the time and effort to find a builder, but I'll have to pay more? And when should you go tiny? Is 2025 the right time for you? If you're sitting here watching in March of 2025, is this the right time for you? It might not be. Maybe you need to do more research. Maybe you need to wait a year. Maybe if you want to see if the market changes in a year or 2 or 3, maybe that's when you do it. Maybe it's the right time for you. But these are the questions I would say that every single person that's looking to go tiny right now needs to ask themselves. So we're coming on this question, bringing you back to the very beginning of this video, asking ourselves, are tiny homes too expensive? And I would say yes, 100% they are, and no. So it just depends on where you sit in this market. So if you're on the buyer side, 100%. I empathize with all of you who are looking to go tiny. I sympathize as someone who is looking to buy a tiny house in the next, hopefully, year or two myself. As a buyer, the prices are too high. Most people don't make enough money to qualify to get a loan, even in the 200 to 400 range for buying a regular house. And I'm seeing people, pour their life savings into buying tiny homes. So from a buyer's perspective, absolutely, tiny homes are too expensive, 100%. But from a market perspective, they're not. And the price could continue to go up. I actually think they are going to go up. I said it a year ago, and I'll say it again. I think that $150,000 tiny houses are definitely going to be the norm. I hope that those of you who are watching make decisions quicker, because I don't think the market is going to work out in your favor if you wait too long. But I also don't want people stressing out about it. And I don't know, it depends on where you're at and what you've saved up. So as always, you got to make smart choices and choices that are best for you. But 100%, it's too expensive on the buyer side. But what do you think? At the end of the day, it really only matters what you think, right? I'm here to provide you as much information as possible so that you can make informed, educated decisions about this amazing industry that so many of us have fallen in love with, but you have to decide if it's right for you. So what do you think? What are you thinking about? Where are you sitting at in your tiny house decision-making journey right now? What do you think about this range of 10K to 235K? Would you buy any of the houses that I showed in this video? As always, I appreciate you guys so much for watching. Make sure you check out my other videos where I talk about whether or not tiny homes are worth it, whether or not they're too big, whether or not tiny home communities are the future. Those are really fun videos to just get you thinking about this industry and think a little bit beyond just the house itself. But yeah, I appreciate you guys for watching, and don't forget to think tiny. I will see you guys in the next one.